Thanks for the question. And let's get started. So my name's Martha McClary. I'm an engagement consultant with B&A Studios, and today we are diving into some of our focused discussion groups that support our OCP update engagement process. And today we're talking about housing and livability. So thanks to everyone who's logged in so far. If you have any questions using the app, I've got my colleague Darby here, who's typing and messaging you guys in the background. So please reach out to her or our team with questions about using the platform of Zoom. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement today. The City of Courtenay respectfully acknowledges that the lands to which this OCP apply are on the unceded territory of the Comox First Nation, the traditional keepers of this land. And in the spirit of reconciliation, the City of Courtenay makes this land acknowledgement to raise awareness of ongoing Indigenous presence and land rights in the territory that includes and encompasses Courtenay. It invites us as settler government and for us as settler consultants to reflect on how we might be perpetuating colonial processes that are ongoing and from which we have benefited, as well as the changes we will make to honor the Indigenous peoples and their lands that we inhabit. So I've introduced myself and my colleague Darby. Also joining us today is Nancy with the City of Courtenay, the Manager of Community and Sustainability Planning, as well as Adam Mattinson, a planner and lead of our Vancouver office for B&A Studios. We're going to take you through the slide deck today. And so the session agenda, after following this introduction and some introductory polls we're going to dive into just an overview very quickly of what's happening with the official community plan update. So just really quick. So for those of you who may have attended the June sessions, this will be a brief overview of what you went through there. Then we're going to dive into the housing needs assessment and take everyone through a little bit more detail on that report, just to give some background for what we're discussing today. And then we'll move forward into discussing livability in Courtenay and some of the tools that could be proposed as part of the official community plan update. So again, the purpose of the session, we hope you leave here with a little bit more understanding of what was happening through the official community plan update. We do want to share a status on some of the housing and livability updates that are going to influence the updates. And then we also want to gather your feedback and comments on our discussion topics today. Just a reminder to everyone, because there's going to be opportunity to unmute and chat with our team and drop questions in, that we do have a session code of conduct where we want to encourage everyone to be respectful in tone, be an active listener, and be inclusive. And we hope you all feel comfortable to participate. If there are any times questions that you want to take aside to the project team, please send us a message or shoot us an email, and we're really happy to respond in more detail to these topics. So we're going to start off getting to know a little bit more about our attendees today and want to know a bit more about what's your experience. So shortly here, Darby's going to launch a poll. It's going to appear within the app, and we want to test out using that polling function just so we make sure everyone has comfort with it. So our first question, we do want to understand, if you're comfortable, where participants are joining from. So if you don't mind dropping your postal code in to the optional response here. If you're uncomfortable, you don't need to respond. But we do just want to learn a little bit more about where you're coming from today. We'll give you a minute to drop your answer into the open comment form. This information will be used just for our purposes to highlight where participants are coming from within Courtenay and the Comox Valley, and we're going to share that through just our reporting back, but it will not be attached directly to any individual participants, just generally aggregated. So thanks for sharing your comments or your location. Oh, great. So we still have a few people dropping in answers. Let's wrap. Darby, we might close that poll now. That's a great participation rate. We won't share the results. Our next question that we'd like to ask participants is, which best describes your current living situation? Do you own your own home? Are you renting your home? Or would you prefer not to share? Again, if you're having any issues participating, message Darby and myself so we can help facilitate. Great. So it looks like a lot of those who are participating today are owners of their home, with a few renters represented. Fantastic. And a general question for the group, are your housing needs being met? So again, yes, no, you can prefer not to share. Thanks for those who are participating. So yes, of the group, we've got 80% saying yes, their housing needs are being met. And then we have a group of 20% saying no. So to follow up on that question, what housing challenges might you be experiencing? And you can select all that apply in your particular circumstance. This includes challenges in finding rental housing, lack of affordable housing options, lack of accessible housing, so for those who need accessibility features, lack of suitable housing for your stage of life. This could both be in terms of numbers of persons living in your household, perhaps downsizing depending on your stage of life, other challenges, and currently you might not be experiencing any challenges. Great. So taking a look at this, it looks like there is a conversation here around lack of affordable housing options, as well as the general challenges of finding rental housing. Those can often go in tandem. And then lack of suitable housing for a stage of life. And this will be interesting as we get into some of the topics later as we discuss some of the policy options. And then appreciate some of you are not experiencing any challenges, and we do appreciate your participation. Pardon me. So I'm going to pass it over to Nancy here just to give a little bit of background about the official community plan update and what's taking place with this project. And then we'll continue to the discussion. So if you have any questions during the presentation, please continue to reach out to Darby and myself, and we'll facilitate on the back end. Nancy, over to you.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'll start by talking about what an OCP is, some of the context. Next slide, please. They are visionary public and community policy planning documents. They inform municipal spending, services, and capital projects, and they provide policies to guide decisions around development applications. They get adopted as a bylaw by mayor and council, and they must adhere to the Local Government Act. Provincial act, that is. They are required in BC, and they must include statements and maps on certain content. And these include housing needs for 20 years. That's what we're talking about today. We have to include information on commercial, industrial, institutional, agriculture, recreation, and public utility land uses. Also areas of sand and gravel deposits. Public facilities, schools, parks, waste treatment, and disposal sites. They have to include information on the approximate location and phasing of any major roads, sewer, water systems. They have to include restrictions on the use of land subject to hazardous conditions and environmentally sensitive areas. They have to include targets and policies on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and where a community is also subject to the regional growth strategy, which ours is, they must be consistent with that regional growth strategy. Courtenay's last OCP was adopted in 2022 following quite a bit of engagement. And the OCP prior to that was from 2005. So it'd been a long, long time for an update. Next slide. So perhaps needless to say, Courtenay did not expect to be updating our OCP so soon after that 2022 adoption, but we're now required to, as per provincial regulation that was introduced in late 2023. This legislation requires that local governments update their OCPs and their zoning bylaws to pre-zone for 20 years of housing. And it requires that this be revisited every 5 years with the community. So you're going to see us doing this conversation again in 5 years. And that new land development regulatory tools were provided by that provincial legislation. I won't get into the detail of those background other tools, but some of them are being talked about today. One of these tools, though, that you may remember from just last year is that in BC, we had to pre-zone all of our single residential properties to allow 4 units per property. And that occurred in a deadline by June last year. And that's for most communities in BC. And given this focus on housing and the recent fulsome update to Courtenay's OCP, our OCP review right now is just very targeted on the housing needs. So rather than looking at the whole OCP all over again. Next slide. Some things have changed since the last OCP, which was based on 2016 census information. And that is that we're growing faster than we thought at that time. People want to live here. A lot of you, I'm sure, enjoy living here. We have to plan for a longer time frame now. It was mandated, it was 5 years of housing needs before this new legislation. Now it's 20 years out. And then and our housing needs report is showing what that means for us is 8,350 additional homes by 2041. And just as a reference point, we have about 13,000 dwelling units right now. Next slide. So what's not changing, however, are kind of the core direction and values of that plan. The OCP is underpinned by what we call cardinal directions of reconciliation, climate action, community well-being, and equity. Those emerged from the public consultation and the council direction of the day. That will continue to guide this work. Through these lenses of these directions, there's a number of goals for Courtenay's growth, and they're identified here on the right. Each of these goals has objectives and then policies within thematic areas such as transportation, infrastructure, housing, natural environment, etc. So where growth will occur in Courtenay and those thematic policies and objectives will remain the same. And analysis for any of those who are on the June 16th kickoff session, the analysis that we're doing has revealed that the OCP land use designations remain valid today and that only refinements within the city's growth management framework will be required and not the creation of new town centers or boundary extensions for residential growth. So that's not something we were able to say as confidently in last month. So we're seeing that now with the analysis. We're still working on the employment and industrial lands analysis, so that could implicate, maybe some changes in land use, but at least for the residential part, the framework is sound. But we do need more attention on specific housing needs, policies, how to address them, and that's the focus of today. Next slide. Our process for this review is now in this phase 2 that you can see right here, and that involves all that background study, looking at the data and talking to the public. And then as we move into phase 3, that will be in the fall, that'll be drafting the bylaw. There will be a public hearing. There will be a notice for all that. Please stay in touch on the website to know exactly when that's happening, but it'll actually also be posted in the newspaper. The deadline here says December. We have learned that we can move this work into the new year. We'll just be bringing that information to council later this month. And so we're just, waiting to talk to council about an amended timeline, but it looks like we can move this. We have a little more time into the new year. Next slide. And the next few slides will be on Courtenay's housing needs report, our very latest one from 2024. And next slide. So what we learned, here's the number, we need another 350 housing units by 2041. And of these, about 27%, 2,281 need to be below market is what the analysis is showing. We like to say, estimated, approximate, etc., because we don't know exactly how many people are going to live here and their needs, but these are approximate numbers. Those projections anticipate that we also need about 2,472 by 2026, and we've been working towards that. That works out to, it's a little under 500 a year, and Courtenay's building team over here down the hall, we've been working through a lot of approvals of housing. So there's developers who want to build it, and there's quite a bit that is actually being built in our community. We're almost meeting our annual targets every year. We're just a little under. Most of the demand should be addressed by market housing in the private market to provide that housing, though there does exist this forecasted need to supply that below market housing and for both owners and renters. And frankly, this is the hardest form of housing to develop right now, just making sure we have those partnerships and subsidies, et cetera, in place. Next slide. So below here, this graph, you'll see what is referred to as a housing continuum. This is a concept used to describe the broad range of housing options available to help the range of households in different tenures to access the affordable and appropriate housing that they need. The concept acknowledges that there is no one size fits all when it comes to housing, and that there is a range of housing that's needed, basically. The continuum includes all the way from recognizing there's people who are homeless and just need to get to, somewhere with a bed, and then moving through towards shelters, transitional housing, community housing, affordable market, and into ownership. And if you can just click once more, the person controlling, thank you. And this is also sometimes depicted as a wheelhouse to better represent how people may move across and between and not just along the categories of housing throughout their lives. So this image is from Collingwood's housing plan, in which it's meant to promote equity and inclusivity, recognizing that home ownership is not the end goal for all people. It doesn't need to be. Or that perhaps maybe someone's owning a home, then they goes through a portion of their life where they're renting, and that's just a change in their circumstance. There's no stigma around that. It's just, housing, there's a lot of forms for different needs. Now, whether depicting housing needs on a continuum or a wheelhouse, the message is the same, that diverse housing options are required in our community. And some of those biggest gaps are supportive housing, as listed here, more attainable for the incomes that are people in our community are earning, and then that mix, including bedroom sizes. Next slide. Now this figure, which I appreciate, there's quite a bit of information on there, but it's from the Housing Needs Report, and it shows a modified version of how people in Courtenay, as of the last census, so it's 2021, are living along the housing continuum included by income category. So this is capturing the current situation. It is not possible to precisely determine the number of households that should occupy each type of housing, because there's a lack of knowledge about those specific circumstances of each individual. However, this gives an estimate, is all I'm trying to say. We can see that people with higher incomes can afford to own homes in Courtenay, whether it's condos or single detached. The word missing middle is there just to help you understand that's recognizing kind of traditionally in North America, we're pretty good at building single residential, we're pretty good at building apartment, but what about those other forms that are in between? Townhomes, things that kind of blend in with a single residential neighborhood, often pretty good family type of housing there. That's referred to as missing middle and is also more affordable. And then at the other end, we can see there's actually about 2,400 local households with low or very low incomes that's earning less than $36,000 a year, often single individuals, and they're at higher risk of needing emergency housing if anything changed in their lives. Next slide. Then we can see this figure from the Housing Needs Report shows the expected, actually this particular figure is not in there, but it's derived from the Housing Needs Report, I should say. It uses a modified continuum of housing graphic just to simply show that by 2041, 148 shelter facilities are needed, 739 to address people who are already spending more than 50% of their income on housing. That's too much. It's considered way too unaffordable. Then there's these 671 for people who are maybe they want to move out from their parents' house. Maybe they're living in a roommate situation they don't want to. This is what's referred to as suppressed households, people who want to form a household but are unable to because of the market. Then we can see most of the growth, almost 6,000 units, are just coming from the community growing. And then it's some more additional units to make sure we maintain that healthier rental vacancy number there. We are over 4% right now as of last October, but we need to see how the future is going to go. We hope we always have more than 3% rental vacancy, so people have options. And then just some demand buffer there, just recognizing the market performs best when there's some variety of product on the market. And then along the bottom there, you can see some of these we often refer to as either supportive options, affordable, or market options, just ways of categorizing some of this types of housing. And some of these lines blur a bit. Next slide. So as part of our OCP update, we have to identify and include policies on all seven of these categories that you're seeing in this graphic right here. We have to address and ensure that housing is near transit and active transportation. That's a requirement of the province. Our OCP was already directing that, so that's where the province and the city are already aligned. Have to have that, language on affordable housing, making sure people aren't spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Specific policies on rental housing, special needs, special supports in those housing. We recognize our seniors population is growing quite a bit. They have special needs, and then families, and then the shelters and homelessness as well, of course. And then, our 2022 OCP includes policies that speak to a number of these themes, but the objective for us is to go deeper, get more to action. So next slide. In speaking we could go to even the next slide. Thank you. In speaking with ministry staff, we've learned that given how recent Courtenay's OCP is, that Courtenay's housing policy framework is a solid foundation upon which more action is needed, and that's the point of discussions like today in this review. This policy framework includes policies that fulfill a housing landscape in Courtenay that achieves these objectives. So these 6 objectives here emerged from the consultation last time we talked to the community about this. People want to make sure there's a variety of housing permitted, positively integrated into all neighborhoods, that there's no net loss of rental housing, that new non-market housing is actively pursued by the city and supported. That may be with regional partners. Incentives are in place to create below market housing. So we're certainly always looking at those opportunities, that we work in partnership, and that we deliver quite a streamlined, easy to understand development approval process for those who do want to develop, so that it's clear to the public, it's clear to the developers, it's clear to council. So those are goals to support affordable housing that are already established in our OCP. Next slide. And just before I turn over to Adam, who will be talking more about policy levers and starting to give some information to seed a discussion we'll have collectively, I just want to take one moment to talk about affordability in Courtenay, but how it's framed in our official community plan. The current OCP includes affordability as a policy foundation that was used to inform the policies in the OCP and how Courtenay will grow. And so the OCP acknowledges that as a public service entity, the city's affordability objectives are quite broad and long range, and that the city considers affordability when planning municipal services, as well as affordability of the households themselves. So a holistic definition of community sustainability, of which affordability, financial sustainability, is included, is in the OCP to ensure that economic, social, and ecological systems are set up to reinforce each other rather than putting them in conflict with each other. Otherwise, then we don't have sustainable systems. So the OCP therefore considers the affordability of some key built environment factors, and by built environment, just referring to municipal's kind of core duties is managing that built environment. We look at considerations of cost of housing, that's discussion today. Look at cost of municipal services insofar that compact and focused forms of community growth are less costly in the long run because costs for municipal services can be shared among a greater number of users. We look at costs as relate to transportation, in that the personal vehicle ownership is the second greatest household cost for most Canadians after housing, and that reducing dependence on the need for a personal vehicle can contribute to housing affordability, less expensive transportation infrastructure, better for the environment, and even public health outcomes that we're seeing, Island Health, for instance, promote, saying, let's get some more physical movement in our day-to-day, from walking, to the store, etc. And then, and also from the perspective of energy costs, in that energy costs in the long run are expected to rise. Now, we don't have a carbon tax anymore, but in any event, most energy is constrained. And therefore reducing energy demand through efficient buildings and transportation will have cost savings as well. So how all those systems interact with also the housing system, I just wanted to share that, because that's how we at the city, and when we talked to the community about affordability last time, these were themes that came up. So now I will move over to pass it on to Adam.
Great, thanks, Nancy. And before we actually pass it on to Adam, we do have a few questions that have popped up, and I just want to take a moment to address some of them because they're relevant to some of the topics you were just covering. Darby, I'm just gonna ask you to unmute and maybe highlight some of the questions that have come through. Is that okay? Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt
for
that.
sure. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's look here. So we did have a comment on Bill 47 and building of high rises based on availability of transportation. Nancy or Adam, do you want to comment on that and maybe just reflect on Bill 47 for a moment?
Good thing. I'm happy to take this one, Darby. So Bill 47 is one of the pieces of legislation that the province did introduce a year ago, just over a year ago now, that requires certain communities, if they've identified a key transit-oriented development area, that there are minimum densities that must be permitted and any sorts of lands that consider residential uses. As it stands right now, Courtenay does not have any of those TODs identified within the community, so it is not subject to that policy, though there are other communities across BC that are. Thank you for the question, though.
Yeah,
Thanks
thanks.
so much, Adam. And we also have a question about removing 655,000 from affordable housing for the footbridge to affect needs. So Nancy, do you mind taking the lead on that one?
Yeah, no problem. I wish I was a person working on the bridge, a pedestrian cycling active transportation bridge, because I would know all the details then. And unfortunately, I don't know the specifics of the financing. I do know I'm trying to remember the percentage. There's a quite significant percentage of the money for the bridge comes from a number of dedicated grants and from senior governments. I know one from the feds. I'm trying to think if there's one from the province. But in any event, it was for dedicated purposes like that. If our community didn't get it, some other community on transportation would have gotten it. The other thing too, which actually connects to my slide I had there about holistic definition of affordability, is that in the long run, we do have a transportation goal of increasing the ability for people to walk and bike and take transit as their daily, maybe not for all uses. I mean, we are a rural community. A lot of people are going to drive, but to switch out some of those uses. And if they can drop from a 2-car household down to a 1-car household, that has big affordability gains. And that's where the bridge can help people get to meet their day-to-day needs by walking and cycling. It's a vision the community's had actually since the late 80s. And every once in a while people say, well, maybe that's an old vision. Why are we still doing that? Actually, as we grow, as we have more people in focused, concentrated areas, particularly the downtown, all the more actually it'll be beneficial to help people walk and cycle. So that's where that bridge fits in that particular conversation. But we know the bridge is a really hot topic right now, for sure. No question.
No, thank you so much, Nancy. I guess one for Adam or Nancy as well. We have a comment about rental availability and how that's increased to about 4% lately, but it's still quite unaffordable for people and sitting vacant, some units, according to this person. So people maybe can't afford a 350 square foot unit with a high price for utilities. So maybe we can comment on that a little bit.
I can definitely take a stab at that first, and Nancy, you can follow if I miss anything.
Yeah.
But yes, we have seen the delivery of some new market rental stock in the community that is definitely a little bit more expensive than some of the older rental stock. That is just by nature of the newer product, the costs that go into it. And in some cases, yes, that is definitely more than what many folks, based on what Nancy was showing there with the data from the Housing Needs Report, that many households are basically able or willing to spend on housing. And that's a bit of the ebb and flow, unfortunately, that comes with the delivery of new housing. We recognize that we need to add new stock, and that as it doesn't get absorbed, as that vacancy rate stays up for a certain point, it will eventually have to come down for those projects to stay afloat and make a return based on what they invested in that construction. So the intent is that it will eventually level off at a point where people are willing to pay for it. So we're hoping that over time, as those projects are filled up, they will create new opportunities. And then as they age, of course, as well, too, they will be comparatively more affordable over time, just as the housing that we built in the 70s and 80s is now considered some of our more affordable rental stock at the same time.
Yeah, I was just trying to consult some of the data from the housing needs report, and one of the last slides I provided had a link to it, and it's actually all on the official community plan engage Comox Valley OCP page, where if you want to get into those details, please do. All I want to say is that there's more information posted online. But there is a table in that report, housing needs report, that just talks about for those, let's say, moderate income in our community, and they're talking about into the getting into the 80,000 range there, that people will want to spend less than $1,500 on, affordable would be spending less than that and per month. And so obviously what you're speaking to is that the market is having units out there for the price that you just identified, 1,500. That means people are probably having to spend more than 30% of their income. We know that, we can see that in the data, and then that's inherently unaffordable and putting pressures on everything else. I guess all of that to say is that there are certain metrics that the housing needs report identifies that we will be using to guide how to support the supply of more of that affordable housing. And some of those tools is what Adam's going to be talking about next. But very complex topic. No, I have to admit, no easy solutions. But today we're here to talk about what a local government's role, City of Courtenay's role, can be in that.
Great segue, Nancy. And I'm just going to jump in just to remind a few housekeeping items. The webinar chat is great, so keep questions coming. If you do have a very specific question, it can be helpful to use the Q&A function within the app. And the reason it's helpful is it allows, sometimes you guys are having comments, and that's great. We want to encourage that discussion. But if you have a very specific question, because we're about to get into some very technical overview of some of the policy tools, it can be really helpful to ask those questions through the Q&A so we don't lose track of them in the chat. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A. Again, if you have a question and then you're looking for clarification, I really encourage you to use that tool within the Zoom platform. It just helps us understand and make sure we're addressing any points of clarity that we need to continue with. And I'm going to pass over to Adam now, because a lot of the chat that's coming is really leading into his section here and the next section of our presentation. So over to you, Adam.
Thanks so much, Martha, and thanks, Nancy, for the overview. And it's great to see the engagement in the chat there. Some of you are already ahead of me here in terms of asking these questions, so hopefully I'll be able to answer some of them as we go through, and I'm sure it'll lead to a few more. But that's all part of what we're here for today. So as Nancy mentioned, we are lucky to be building on a strong foundation with the 2022 OCP being quite proactive in terms of its policies and approach. That said, there are several areas where municipalities like Courtenay can further improve opportunities to add a range of housing options across the spectrum of need. Before we dive too deep into our options, it's important to recognize that housing is a team effort that requires assistance and engagement from all levels of government, partners, and the community working together. When we talk about how government specifically can help, there are several tools available depending on which level of government we are talking about. And while in recent years there has been an increased focus at the federal and provincial levels to help address some of these issues in terms of increasing capacity and investing in communities, municipal options specifically are a little bit more limited. And so that's where we're actually looking at, for example, at the top two options here on this graph here, where we talk about some of the policy options that we see at the federal level. When it comes down to the tools that we're focusing on for the purposes of this study, and you can just click to highlight them, we're really looking at some of the more focused local tools that involve streamlining of regulations, in effect, what can be built where, and the costs imposed on development to ensure growth contributes to the community. So we can just click ahead here. So those are those ones that are at the local level there, particularly regarding regulations and accessible financing and costs. And in the Courtenay context, there are several tools we could consider to help bring forward more housing options as part of the OCP and the parallel zoning bylaw update that's also happening. For the purpose of today's workshop, we've identified 8 general tools Courtenay could implement to help deliver more housing, which are split more generally between more permissive and inclusive regulations and improved processes and financial supports. While many of these tools have been applied in communities around the world, and we need to stress that many of these are relatively new in the BC context, having only been granted to municipalities by provincial legislation in the past few years. So this OCP update is timely and able to actually properly utilize these through our own policies. To help guide today's discussion, I'm going to provide a brief overview of what each of these tools could look like on the following slides. Let's start with streamlined zoning. This option is, at its most basic, consider simplifying the zoning bylaw that we have today to be more straightforward in terms of what can be built without requiring a formal rezoning, which can be quite a costly and time-consuming process. This includes better guidance on building heights, densities, and the amount of area the building can take up on a property if someone were to redevelop it, or, for example, if someone were to add an addition to an existing property or building. Given the current official community plan already contemplates a range of ground-oriented and low-rise buildings across most parts of Courtenay, this could potentially go a step further by pre-zoning or upzoning lands in strategic growth areas like the downtown, for example, to better align with the established community vision, removing a time-consuming and costly step to bring forward new housing. We also have the option to expand permitted forms of housing, including permitting supportive housing in all residential zones rather than one-off custom projects. This would remove a significant barrier for delivering assistance for seniors, those with disabilities that need special care, and those in need of transitional housing and emergency shelters that may need specific development approvals otherwise. Another option that we can look at is the introduction of residential zoning that is exclusively limited for the purposes of purpose-built rental development only. By limiting competition with freehold and condominium developments, this type of designation could help to deliver more rental housing stock in strategic, well-serviced areas. It also helps to ensure that rental housing built in the area will be preserved as such and not converted to condos over time whenever the market conditions favor such. This is a relatively new option that was introduced by the province in 2018 and has been applied in communities like New Westminster in recent years to great effect. Now, it's also worth noting that the 2022 OCP also recognizes the potential for mid-rise buildings up to 5 or 6 stories, and even high rises up to 8 stories and potentially more, though these are not permitted as of right and would require a rezoning. And we have seen some of these projects brought forward and even recently completed in recent years. So this has been the process that these projects have had to go through one-off rezoning. However, rather than requiring one-off rezonings, the city now has the option to introduce a density bonus policy that would allow housing projects to add additional height and density in specific areas beyond what is currently permitted up to a very prescribed limit. In exchange, they must provide community amenities that could also include affordable housing contributions. This approach has the benefit of capturing some of the additional land value created by additional density, transforming it into public goods, while still providing both builders and the community a clear idea of how much density will be permitted, where, and at what cost. Several municipalities across BC, including Coquitlam and the City of North Vancouver, for example, have used similar tools to grow their communities in such a manner, though the tool was only formally introduced via legislation last year, so they were effectively ahead of the curve and have shown great promise with this tool. Going beyond density bonusing, municipalities have also recently been granted the ability to establish an inclusionary housing requirement on new development, as shown on the next slide. Depending on how this tool is applied, the tool can require all new development, either citywide or in specific areas, to set aside a percentage of their housing units that must meet a minimum level of affordability as defined by the municipality. This tool has been used in select high-growth and high-cost municipalities across North America as a means to ensure new development is setting aside some units that may be below market rate. Unlike density bonusing, which captures some of the increased land value created by higher densities, this approach instead requires other units in the development cross-subsidize the affordable units. Now, this runs the risk of making these other units potentially more expensive, or alternatively, in challenging markets, may prevent some forms of development from being viable. The province, in introducing this tool, requires municipalities seeking to use inclusionary zoning policies to test the financial impacts of the policy to ensure that it does not negatively affect the potential to deliver new housing and growth. As part of our work on this project, our team is investigating the potential to use this tool, and while work on the financial analysis is still ongoing, we can note upfront that it does become quite challenging when other expensive development requirements, such as underground parking, are also required. So those are the first four tools that Courtenay could potentially use, particularly as it relates to permissive and inclusive regulations. Before we continue, I'd like to take a moment to pause here and invite audience members to ask questions that they might have related to these four tools specifically. So feel free to ask your questions using the Q&A button and text as a question at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be happy to answer before moving on.
We did have some coming in, specifically a question, parking came up in one of your earlier slides, Adam. We have a minute 40 or 1:40 when we were at that point. Did you want to discuss parking at all? Stephen, if you wanted to elaborate on that comment, jump in. If you'd like to unmute yourself too, you are able to raise your hand and we can unmute, or you're able to continue to drop your questions and comments into the chat. And Stephen, I'm going to allow you to talk. Also, this is a good time to do a housekeeping reminder for those who have just joined. We are recording this session, and if we're maybe posting either today's session or Thursday's session on our website so others can view. So, Stephen, I'm going to give you a chance to ask your question. You're being asked to unmute, so you have to unmute on your side.
I've done that. Thanks. Can you hear me all right? Yeah.
Hi, Stephen. Yes.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I think parking is quite important. It seems to be there's a move, at least in some of the cities and maybe in some of the smaller towns, but I haven't noticed there, to reduce parking and to get people, riding bicycles and on foot and so on, which may not be practical in certain situations, particularly with an elder population. So that has that concern that it's more limiting when we're making more place for people to live, but we're not making it possible for people to be able to get around easily. Secondly, I think the changes to the neighborhood, I think, is an important thing to keep in mind. In other words, people might buy a piece of property now or bought it 10 years ago in a neighborhood because they like the view, for example, and now we put up a not just a 10-story, but a 20-story building, and in front of them are, change the whole character of the neighborhood. So I think that's important that we should keep that in mind, and we don't put just housing, in other words, making more boxes for people to be in, the uppermost thing in our mind. I think there are other elements which are really important. Thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Those are great questions and really great points. And I think you raise some real challenges we have with accommodating and balancing the costs of providing affordable housing and other quality of life issues that are very real for the community here. Recognizing the character of Courtenay, why people want to live in the community, is very much a factor that we want to continue to keep in mind as we develop these policies. And I think that it's really important to, again, stress that we're not intending through this work to shift the vision about what Courtenay is. So we want to keep those elements in mind, and those as we look at things like, for example, parking requirement, which you're absolutely right. Many people do still require automobiles depending on where they're living to get around and get to work, or for accessibility issues, depending on their mobility, are all serious considerations that we need to consider. And so there are ways that we can look at potentially still requiring parking to a certain degree. Maybe that requirement is reduced in certain areas, particularly maybe areas that are well serviced by alternative means of transportation. It might not be citywide. But we want to be conscientious about creating opportunities so that folks that don't have to take a car are able to do so, but that also making sure that people that do still need that kind of option to also have that opportunity available. With regards to respecting the community vision about what the form of the community looks like, again, that is something that we also want to respect, that was a community vision that was very clearly articulated as part of the 2022 OCP update. And as part of the tools we're looking at, we're not proposing at this stage right now any significant changes from the built form that was discussed in the 2022 OCP. Though some of the tools we are talking about here would basically just be making some of the barriers in those areas where those higher density forms are permitted. Like I said, right now, most of them are basically up to 4 stories as the baseline, much like what's in the downtown and some parts of the community, the urban growth centers particularly. We might be able to remove some of the restrictions on those so that those can be built according to what was already put forward in the 2022 OCP, with minimal additional, basically, administration required. And also recognizing that if people are going to go taller to some of the heights that are in very limited considered to potentially have some higher capacity, they would have to get back to the community in the form of either affordable housing or amenities that make the community around them better. as a condition of getting that additional density before it's even considered. So those are things that we want to make sure are built into these tools if they are to be used. And we appreciate your feedback and thoughts about anything with regards to basically as we do that work. Thank you. Nancy, I see you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking, Adam, I think I'm just building on what you said, is that for those who move to those neighborhoods where they feel, they move there for a reason, probably quieter pace, lower density, quiet street. That's that designation we call urban residential. And any changes to those areas, any major changes, have actually, those were mandated by the province last year. And that's what that small scale multi-unit housing zoning was all about, was allowing 4 units per those lots. And actually, I'll also add there's a smaller subdivision lot size. So actually some of those could subdivide too. And what's expected is that in those areas, that'll be a very gradual change on the street. People will see maybe, newer parts of town, maybe you won't see anything, or maybe a carriage house will pop up here and there, or a suite in a house. So I think that character there in those neighborhoods will be a gradual change. And then, as Adam was just mentioning, a lot of the focus of the growth now is frankly a more urban Courtenay in the more urban centers, and that's where we're talking about focusing growth, and again, already identified in the 2022 OCP. And those areas then were identified then because they already had some multi-residential, some mix of uses, so they were kind of laying the groundwork for adding more homes and businesses in those areas. And again, a more urban future, frankly, but a more urban future in those centers, I guess, is what I'm roundabout trying to get to say. So hope that adds a piece. Maybe I'll just add something on parking too. Our financial analysts who are looking at kind of the economics of development, just reminding us that what trade-offs, real trade-offs around between parking and housing. There's actually a third trade-off we often talk about, is just trees, mature trees, keeping those. There's kind of trying to balance those 3 things: landscaping, parking, and homes. Often we are trying to have there are trade-offs. It's hard to do all quite well. And then when we get to underground parking, gets quite expensive. And so as part of the conversation start to be like, well, maybe do we have lower parking so that we get more units? Or is it important to have that parking and have fewer units? So these are all the nature of the trade-offs we're having and talking to you guys about.
Yeah, and I'm cognizant of time because we do have 4 more tools to get to. But Stephen, before you go, you have continued to drop a few more comments in the chat. I think even one specifically asking about, is this discriminatory? Did you want to ask a clarifying question to the team? Yeah, you should be unmuted still unless.
Can I speak?
Yes, yeah.
Great, thanks. Yeah, no, I guess I'll just put a point that if you rent an apartment, let's say in a building, and then you find that the people on the floor above you are getting the same apartment for half the price, then you would have to look at what are the policies that differentiate the 2 families, for example. And I think that may be an issue regarding discrimination. I noticed the word inclusivity comes up quite a bit, and I know there's an immigration problem here in Canada. And you kind of wonder whether the reasons for giving someone a lower rent are actually fair. So it was just mostly a comment that I'm sure you'll address.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. We did have a couple other questions that came in that I do want to take a minute, and thank you, Stephen, for your comments and questions. And Darby, help me out. I think we've got a lot coming in, so I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Well, one good question actually cues into the next topic is, thank you, Shirley, for your comment. What are the current plans for affordable housing, as most people I meet are not able to afford the rentals out there in Courtenay? So we can continue to talk about that with some of the other tools coming up. But Adam or Nancy, did you want to do a quick preview on that for that question?
I think I'll actually be answering some of those questions as it relates to the following actually a few of the questions in there. I will be answering in some of the next tools coming up here. So how about I jump into those, and then we'll circle back to the questions, because I think some folks are already on the right track, and happy to answer any outlying questions after that.
Just before you move on, there's just one more about inclusionary zoning that I just wanted to confirm before we move on. There was a question about inclusionary zoning having maybe like a time frame that it's implemented. So I just want to touch on that before we go forward. And then
Yeah, that's a great question. And thanks. I think it was Davies, it looks like. Yes, that is an issue of administration for the bylaws. Municipalities have a fair degree of flexibility about how they choose to develop both density bonusing and inclusionary bylaws as it relates to affordable housing requirements. And that is something that it may not necessarily be answered by this OCP project itself. It may be a follow-up project related to this in terms of determining what is fair and equitable about who qualifies and for how long. There are certain ways to means test, for example, what type of income you have to have and how they continue to qualify for those reduced rates. And in terms of development, how long the building operator has to continue to offer affordable rates, whether or not, for example, it's a nonprofit operator that might be operating in perpetuity, or if it's included in a mixed project that may, as Stephen mentioned, you may have a mix of market rate and affordable units within a project. Typically, a lot of municipalities will have quite a long time frame on the inclusionary requirement, usually well over a decade or so, sometimes into the 10s, 50s of decades for almost the lifetime of the building. So there's a lot of things that can be looked at as part of the development of that policy, and we appreciate folks' feedback and thoughts on that as well.
And then just a quick question that also came in just on a technical basis that I want to address before we move on. It seems to me that this coming in from Frank seems to me that the quality of the results of this review is highly dependent on the quality of your demographic forecasts. And are you happy with your current forecasts? Do you guys want to maybe speak to a bit more about that?
A good question, Frank. And yes, I mean, the methodology that we are required to work from is basically we have to work towards the need identified in the housing needs reports, which themselves are based on the province's projections, which are done called the people projections, and they're prepared for municipalities across British Columbia. They are always changing, like they're updated annually. I mean, as a demographer and someone who does projections myself, they are quite robust. But like any projection and forecast, they do rely on a set of assumptions. And so those assumptions are subject to change over time, and that's why they do update them annually. So we have to take the HNRs based on a point in time forecast, which was done over a year ago. And it does provide a strong outlook for growth, some of which was based on the high level of immigration we were experiencing not too long ago. That might be changing in the years to come. For example, we do know that the government of Canada has changed their overall immigration targets for both permanent residents and non-permanent residents and students, which will have a knock-on effect for housing need. That is part of the reason why the province has required that we do this exercise on a 5-year rolling basis now. So previously, where municipalities might have gone 5, 10, 20 years without having updated their OCPs, now we will be receiving updated projections on a regular basis to track how that need might be changing and adjusting our policies accordingly.
Great. Thanks. And let's continue on to some of the remaining. So back to you, Adam.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks so much. So the other side of the pie here, the next 4 tools are a little bit more focused on the timing and cost of delivering housing. Because at the end of the day, the delivering of housing, whether it's built by the public sector or by private developers, is an investment. There are costs involved with land, materials, labor, levies, and the development process itself that will affect whether the project can be delivered in a cost-effective manner. An unfortunate reality of the post-pandemic world we all share is that costs have been growing significantly, as we've seen in many aspects of our daily lives. The same is true for builders and for municipal governments, and in some cases, their cost increases have grown far faster than even what we've experienced at the grocery store. To help address these costs, there are certain levers that municipalities like Courtenay can pull, 2 of which are summarized here. The first relates to application efficiencies, which is effectively offering efficiencies related to the development application process for projects that meet specific affordable housing goals, or for example, maybe mixed housing goals, like for example, providing a certain percentage of larger 3+ bedroom units. When it comes to building housing, there is a considerable amount of borrowing that is typically involved to cover project costs, meaning that time very literally is money. In effect, the longer it takes to bring a project through the development process, the more expensive it becomes. To assist with this, the city could follow other municipal examples by offering priority processing for development permits that offer preferred forms and mixes of housing. For example, a project that offers a minimum amount of below market units, or perhaps a minimum amount of family size units, could potentially move to the front of the line when it comes to applying for the development permits, or even have a special staff member that is delegated special powers by council to approve certain requirements more quickly, allowing that process to get shovels in the ground more quickly at the same time. This approach could speed up the process, but would require additional staff resources to implement. Alternatively, the city could also consider offering reductions on development levies that are charged on new projects if they meet a similar target. Examples could include an affordable rental project that is granted perhaps a 50% or even a full abatement for having to pay their development cost charges before receiving a permit. And for those of you that are not deep in the weeds in terms of planning policy, development cost charges are charges that are levied on new development to pay for things like new parks, pipes, and infrastructure upgrades to the roads. There is also some potential to explore tax incentives for specific projects like purpose-built rental housing, including reduced property tax mill rates. Though municipalities in BC, I have to note, do have a limited amount of power to utilize this at a local level when compared to other municipalities across Canada due to the way that the province interprets legislation. Regardless, with any sort of financial incentive like the ones I've just covered here, it's important to keep in mind that when we offer a financial incentive from the community, this would need to be offset by other funding sources because we still need to, for example, pay for the municipal investment in things like roads and parks and whatnot that would otherwise have come from those levies or property taxes. So we may need to find other funding sources, either from maybe grants from upper levels of government or increased tax base to spread that cost out across more members of the community. So these are the trade-offs we want to keep in mind when we talk about these kinds of tools. The other two tools that we want to talk about involve a more active role on the municipality's part in the development of housing. The first involves the municipality itself injecting its own equity into the development of specific projects. Examples of this include a formal policy that might prioritize any surplus city-owned land being put towards deeply affordable or, for example, emergency shelter projects. Alternatively, the municipality could also establish a municipal affordable housing fund that collects fees and reinvests them directly into affordable housing projects within the community. This approach is utilized by many BC municipalities that already collect cash in lieu of affordable housing contributions from their rezonings, density bonuses, and inclusionary zoning requirements where they have them. Beyond deploying its own funding and assets, the city can also work to establish and grow its relationships with upper levels of government and not-for-profit housing organizations. As I mentioned at the outset, it really does take a village to bring housing across the spectrum to the market. And this type of approach, by building these relationships with the province, the federal government, and not-for-profit housing developers and operators in particular, would better position Courtenay to secure those types of time-limited grants funding that allow us to build housing in a timely manner, while also attracting partners that are the best suited to develop and operate those affordable housing options within the community. An example of this kind of budding partnership is the recent emergence of the Comox Valley Regional District Housing Corporation, as is shown on the next slide. This organization was recently established at the direction of the CVRD board, and the entity is currently establishing partnerships and its own organizational structure to serve as a local body that specializes in the delivery of non-market rental housing projects. The mission of the CVRD Housing Corporation will position it as a key ally in the development of housing options for low to moderate income households seeking to find attainable below market options in the valley. Startup work within the Housing Corporation is ongoing, with a formal launch anticipated in the spring of next year. But it is one example of one of the partnerships we could be looking at to improve both delivery and operation of housing within the broader municipal sphere of public influence. So that sums up the latter four financially focused tools in Courtenay's toolkit. Before we move on to the broader discussion section of today's meeting, I'd like to pause once more to check if there are any audience questions related to these four specific tools. As with before, I encourage you to utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your window to type any questions you might have.
We're getting some comments and I appreciate some of the comments about the tools that we were listed available. One comment coming through just that wanted to share was, in general, when we're talking about upper levels of government, we are still meaning taxes, paid for by all residents. So that was just one comment. So thank you for that point. And then in discussion in terms of do any of these tools lead to a further dramatic increase in property taxes to provide more funds for affordable housing? And questions around how does that impact affordability for those who might already be experiencing some affordability issues if property taxes are going up? So there's a bit of a discussion there. Any comments, Adam and Nancy, specifically on some of that taxation conversation?
I can add maybe just from our own council's perspective, and of course our local councils change all the time. Next election is fall 2026. The perspective of our current council is that for those deeply forms of affordable housing, the non-market and the emergency shelters, etc., that those are traditional responsibilities of more senior governments of the federal government, the provincial governments. And our council, in all their work, does lobby and work with those different bodies to form relationships and seek funding and make that case that there should be a stronger role for senior governments. Of course, the thing that Martha just said was only one taxpayer kind of thing, so it kind of shows up somewhere else in the public paying for that. But in any event, City of Courtenay's council is trying to remember where their core duties on this rely, and for those more complex forms of housing are seeking those partnerships and those other governments.
Great. And coming in from Tim as well. Thanks, Tim. And if you want to put up your hand to speak to this further, you're welcome to. What consideration has been given to intergenerational fairness? So we have heard the story a lot in the news that, boomers have historically, older generations, I think sometimes boomers is not the kindest way to refer to the generation, that have historically benefited from low entry price points, low taxation, tax-free gains with restrictive zoning policies, whereas younger generations have been priced out of some home ownership and often carry the weight of the new construction costs, and generally experience lower housing options. So some of the sometimes some of the those who are not necessarily favoring some of the housing interventions and can cause increase of costs to future generations. Is there any discussion there on some of the generational conversation? Hot button question though, Tim. Thanks for sharing.
I'll try to jump into this one if I can. I think it is a great question, and when we talk about equity and fairness as it relates to housing, I think Tim did touch on a very salient point as it relates to taxation as well too, because we have over the years moved away from a model where upper levels of government were very, very engaged in all forms of affordable housing in terms of subsidization, CMHC grants that went towards, for example, market rental. So a much broader spectrum of housing. And those had gradually eroded or been downloaded to municipalities that didn't have the tools to provide them over time. Municipalities were eventually given tools like, for example, development cost charges and other things that older home purchasers did not have to pay at the time. Those were effectively paid for through the tax base back in the day when new communities went in, a lot of, not in all cases, but in many cases. And so that did result into them getting a fairly good deal when they bought their housing. And more recently, as those costs have been downloaded, municipalities have instead been passing on those costs as a condition of development under the mantra that growth pays for growth. And there is an argument to be made that growth should be paying its fair share. But when we talk about equity, I think it is a discussion that is a relevant question to have, to recognize that new members of the community that are looking to get into the market are saddled with a bit more of a cost than what previous housing may have had to provide in the past. And that does ask the question as a community, how folks intend to, they see as in terms of a priority for allowing folks to join the community and have a chance to get on the property ladder, or even not getting on the ladder, just finding reasonable housing at the end of the day. And so these are really pertinent questions that we want to consider when we're looking at these policy options, and it's for the community and the council to determine how they want to proceed in that regard.
Yeah. And before we move on, I do want to make sure we're addressing questions on the policy tools and the interventions that Adam was just covering. So if there are any questions related to what we just covered, let's get those out of the way, respecting that we have about 25 minutes left in this webinar before we get into some of our discussion where we can have other discussion on a broader topic. Any specific comments or questions people want to drop in the chat or drop in the question about some of the application efficiencies, the financial incentives, municipal investment, and partnership opportunities that were just shared? Stephen, I see your hands up. I'll allow you to talk. Is it a question related to what we just covered?
Well, I'm not really sure because we've covered a number of different things, but
Yeah.
yeah, I do have some concerns. So, one is that a lot of young people got their houses from their parents, when they were able to inherit them, and that took a weight off the market because they could then put a whole family in there. And I just have concerns about, as I mentioned in the chat, the increase in property taxes that would be necessary to accommodate the idea of putting roofs over the heads of everybody. I think giving everyone a shelter is important, but I think that how that's funded is really key. And I'm getting the impression it's a little bit like a shell game. We're asking for money from the provincial government, the federal government, but where does that money actually come from? Well, it comes from those people who are paying taxes. And I have that concern. I think the fact is we maybe need to look at areas where we can tighten our belts. And I see there's a comment about this bridge and actually find ways where we can shift money that's being spent on unnecessary things to what we may consider more important.
Yeah, fair. And I think and some of the conversation that Adam was sharing, again, I know there were discussions around requiring funding from higher levels of government, but some of the other incentives and efficiencies also were maybe different methods, whether they were removing fees or diverting or having people pay in to different funds. So appreciate that comment though. Any questions on Roger, you just asked a question, CVRD Housing Corporation consulting process question. I might be misunderstanding the question, Adam. Or Nancy, does that make sense to you? CVRD Housing Corporation consultation process?
Yeah, I'm not sure if the inquirer might want to speak up and just clarify, but if the question is around the CVRD, Comox Valley Regional District's consultation process for the creation of a housing corporation or some language they use also as a housing entity for low it was target amount was those below market rental housing. If anything about the process of that, no one on the call would be able to speak to with any authority, just as is a project of the Comox Valley Regional District. So we'll just have to acknowledge our own lack of detailed knowledge of that process at this time.
Roger put up his hand so he can speak to the question. Roger, go ahead.
Let's hear it.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess because there was a separate slide in the last section about the CVRD, I guess, it's just that they went through the alternate approval process and got approval for it. And so there's additional taxation and the establishment of some kind of entity, but it's really not clear in my mind, what the process is really going to look like. So I guess it was more of a comment than a question.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate that, Roger. That I think we need to building on that point. They are still effectively building out their own mandates right now. They've given the green light to start getting the organization off the ground, but until such time as the formal launch is brought forward, which again is spring 2026, I think the details are still a little bit in flux right now. And I believe they do have a consultation process with regards to what that will look like. So I don't have the details myself, but I would strongly encourage anyone who's interested to check out the CVRD's website because they will have more details there.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. And we'll head into the next discussion. So we're going to continue with our discussion, and we do have some targeted questions, but we do hope you continue to participate. You're encouraged to raise your hand. You can drop questions into the Q&A function or through the chat. So we encourage all methods of participation, and we do have two key questions that we'll be facilitating. And the first question starts with the statement that we pulled, and Nancy, addressed as well, talking about the housing needs report, that Courtenay needs to meet the needs of each housing element. And you've seen this wheel before. There has been some discussion in the chat so far, and it's been great, but we're asking two questions on this. Where are we doing well in terms of meeting each housing element? And where do we need more attention? So that's the question component we wanted to open up with early in the discussion. I know that we had some comments earlier, and Darby, if you wanted to jump in too, just in case I've missed any in the chat that might be pertinent to this discussion here.
Yeah, I can look at some here.
And now also is a great time, if you did want to make one of your points in the chat that maybe we've gone through, since there's been so many great comments, please do put up your hand, and we really invite those to speak and share their comments through the discussion. Roger, I think you're able to still speak. Go ahead. Your hand is up.
Okay.
Hi.
Okay. Well, I think that we're seeing a lot of rental housing being built.
Yeah.
The challenge is the affordability factor on.
Yeah.
So whether or not the market is going to shift, because and these are mostly private rentals, private market rentals that are coming up or that are being built. But the affordability is a challenge for a lot of people. So whether or not the market is going to shift, the information coming out of CMHC and StatsCan says that we're going to see a shift, but we really haven't seen it yet here in the Comox Valley.
Right.
But the private market rentals, they're going to, the reason why they're building it isn't affordability factor for tenants. It's for profit. So the idea, I guess there needs to be a bit of a mind shift about what what housing is, whether it's a commodity or whether it is what someone would say is a human right.
Right. And we did see some of those comments earlier too. Thank you for sharing, Roger. And just echoing, I think it's James, if I'm mentioning his comment correctly, around that we brought up earlier, that the new units that people might not be able to afford at the cost of the new unit. And I know Adam addressed that a bit. Anything else you wanted to add on that point, Roger? Or
no, I think
okay.
I think I'm good.
Yeah, great, thank you. Adam or Nancy, did you want to respond? I know there was also a comment that came up. I'm trying to find it. Quoting Adam when you're
I'm just thinking of Roger's comment there and the kind of profit motivation of the market, and that's a reality of housing, a lot of housing in Canada, in North America as well. And I just say, we're aware too that developers who are building this rental housing, we see they're observing, if the prices start to come down, maybe they don't have a viable project, right? And so then they're not motivated to build the housing. So it's part of kind of this challenge of housing as a system. I know, certainly there's a lot of attention on affordable housing at the federal level and the provincial level as well, which it's good to see every government talking, at least. I mean, I know it feels like it's taken forever to get to action. But I know there's policy levers the feds are looking at with how to change the financing regime. Is there things that can be done with improving the availability of labor and materials, and this fabrication? Can efficiencies and cost savings be made in those respects? So I think when all those things are working together, we might start to see some of those affordability gains. Maybe a developer could still make profit and actually produce housing that's affordable for people. But right now it's challenging given the way housing is provided in Canada right now.
Yeah, and maybe a question for you, Adam, coming in from Davies earlier in the session. He meant, I think this was your response you had originally given, was that the fact that BC Housing is very out of touch with current rental rates across the province, by which they base their calculations on. And Adam, you had said you'd assume older rentals would be more affordable as newer buildings come available. However, the reality in our valley is that both of these scenarios are not accurate. Any commentary on that from some of the affordability
Yeah.
information? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nuance to those statements too. So I just want to clarify that it is every community is different, and that's why, we're looking to develop a Courtenay specific approach here. And that's why, as part of the OCP and any bylaw that we would develop, it would be when we talk about affordability, when we talk about targets, they would be relative to Courtenay specific as part of the process. BC Housing does have a lot of data they work with, and there are some markets where even older stock, especially there's a lot of competition for a community like Courtenay that is so desirable, that really you see older rents, or rents in older buildings going up and up and up because people will compete for it. And that often happens when you don't have enough new supply to take the pressure off that existing stock in particular. So that's something that we see as a challenge. If we don't have enough new supply for the folks that can afford to pay for that, then they'll start to compete for those older rental units when they become available, which has a downward pressure effect, and it rises rents across the board. So it's not unique to Courtenay, but it definitely is, I'd say, acute in Courtenay just because of what a great community it already is. And we see people from across Western Canada wanting to move to that. We often joke, my partner and I, she's from Courtenay originally, and we're there all the time. But it's really become a bit of like what Squamish was 10 years ago. The secret's just finally gotten out, and people are realizing that the mix of amenities and lifestyle and everything in there. And so people now want to be here, but it's going to have that impact on competition, unfortunately. And we need to get the supply to catch up, or else that competition's going to have nowhere to go.
Thanks, Adam. No, that was great. I think kind of tying into some of the discussions we're having, we have a comment about the current plans for affordable housing. As most people this person meets are unable to afford the rentals in Courtenay. And I think this ties into what we might be doing well by maybe encouraging a diverse range of housing. So maybe, Nancy, we could touch on some of the existing affordable housing that's in the OCP currently, or the efforts towards affordable housing for policy.
Yeah, I'd say the main effort so far is in supporting the market to produce the housing. So yeah, local government role, largely our biggest role is in regulatory, allowing the housing to go in different places through zoning controls and the servicing, requirements for that housing. So I'd say the bulk of our effort traditionally in Courtenay has been on that regulatory side and affecting the zonings. There are tools we've been using more recently in the past 10 years, called from our community amenity contribution negotiations. There's a big word, but traditionally when a developer was coming and proposing a rezoning for particularly larger housing projects, that they would have to provide 10% of their units at 30% below market rate. These are rentals for a certain period of time, and it was often a 10-year frame was often the frame. So these are these negotiation pieces that council staff would do with developers to get some affordable, but again, a lot of those were time bound. Now we're moving, it seems like we're evolving our approaches to respond to the crisis of affordability. And now we're looking more at, what more can be done from the local government's perspective, maybe participating in that Comox Valley Housing Corporation. We still have to figure out our role, frankly. Some people are saying, what is that role? It's still being determined. And then the City of Courtenay can offer land wherever we have some, when we have partners, housing partner come forward. And actually in our downtown plan, that's one of the things we're looking at. If some city land around the Harmston Park area for affordable housing, possibly. And then trying to waive those development fees, etc. But they have to come from somewhere else. So that is getting at that kind of philosophical question: should growth pay for growth? Those new people, maybe those new people who haven't benefited from having, I don't know, housing legacy or wealth from it, or should it be spread evenly across the tax base? So these are actually, questions, kind of democratic questions, but these, it's good to have these conversations, understand what the city of people think in Courtenay.
Nancy, that's a good comment because we actually did get a question about that and having a holistic approach and, benefiting the entire community, but kind of spreading the growth costs amongst all property taxpayers. So, yeah, thank you for making a note of that one. I guess to jump off of that, we can also look at some comments about considering different alternative forms of housing that might not necessarily be currently in Courtenay right now. We have a couple questions about, if we can look at international examples or why we're even considering other examples of social housing. So yeah, Adam or Nancy maybe potentially could answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking at other opportunities that would be appropriate in the Courtenay context. There are some great examples of applications or programs designed for affordable housing with social good in mind from across North America and across the world, frankly. You often hear folks talk about inclusionary zoning policies that were tried in San Francisco and Berkeley and even as far out as Boston. We see Vienna gets tossed around a lot. It's important to keep in mind that many of these projects, we always look at them and find out if they can be applied in the local context, given the legislation we have, first and foremost, because municipalities are restricted in what they can and cannot do and ask for. And other things we need to keep in mind too is some examples that we look at. Often, like anything, when it comes to the market for housing or stocks or any sort of like there is a buying and selling of goods, is sometimes there are periods where governments make a move that was much more affordable for them to do so. That's, for example, a big case of how Vienna got started with their very prominent, very productive, very successful model because they were able to do it during a downturn, which we haven't seen yet. Maybe those opportunities will present themselves, and maybe we can position ourselves to have a policy that's able to take advantage of opportunities when the market presents itself. And I think that's part of the OCP process here is to ensure that the municipality is aware of each opportunity they can apply within that toolkit that they're allowed to use when the opportunities present themselves.
No, that's great, Adam. And I think that ties into one other comment that we have as well is looking at more innovative approaches to creating housing stock. So different types of housing. One comment said that they noted that there was 3D printing of housing. So that's just an option of innovative, but is there going to be a consideration of that as we go through this process?
I think that's something we could certainly look at. When we talk about process improvements in particular, it's actually a really interesting opportunity right now. We're seeing a lot of innovation from BC developers when it comes to things like mass timber product and a lot of linkages with existing industry we have. I mean, Courtenay and the Valley have a strong industrial heritage with forestry products that has waned a bit, but that could be a potential to drive innovation that not only provides housing, but also economic opportunity. These would be bigger picture questions about trying to find ways to incentivize those kinds of opportunities. But when it comes to things like mass timber, 3D printing housing, we have to also keep in mind that as with any new technology, it often takes a lot of investment to spool up in terms of getting everything at a scale that those cost efficiencies can be realized. And that's something that we are seeing a lot of developers right now when it comes to like 3D printing a house right now. There's some test cases that have worked really well, but it's not something that can be done at scale particularly easy. The province of BC is making a lot of big moves as it comes to mass timber and also panelized housing. So you can do kind of like the Sims where you slot together prefabricated housing panels that, back in the day, prefab used to be kind of a word for poor quality. Some of the stuff that's coming out right now from local developers in Western Canada is incredible. And so there may be opportunities to bring forward designs that are easy for staff to approve, easier for folks to afford and assemble in a quicker, shorter amount of time, and they provide some very high quality products. So we can look at a range of policy options that the municipality in partnership with the government, the provincial government may be able to, again, reduce some barriers and make them more viable over the future to realize some of those efficiencies.
I'm jumping in, I'm cognizant of time, but we had two questions come in that sort of pertain to some of the tools we discussed that I would like to post to the group. And panelists, if you see any other questions you want to dive into, let me know. But we just had a question come in to the panelists from Brendan about the potential to amortize direct DCCs over time. So post completion of development, rather than force the builder to pay up front when cash flows on a project are most tight. Is this one of maybe the financial tools that might be considered as an example?
Absolutely. And a very timely question. The province just changed the rules in terms of how long developers can have, or municipalities can grant developers in terms of how quickly they have to pay back their DCCs. Typically, it was required at the time of building permit. So that was a big upfront investment requirement from developers. And so now municipalities can push that back as far as 24 months as of last week, is my understanding. So there's some opportunities there. But we also have to keep in mind that, as with any financial incentive, a lot of the projects that are tied to the use of DCC funds have a knock-on effect for the municipality. So the developer and the end user maybe are not paying it as upfront, and they're not carrying as much in terms of borrowing fees. But the municipality, at the same time, they still have to put the pipes in the ground to enable some of those projects. They still have to expand the roads, build those projects that allow the community to be functional and livable. And if we push back the time that we collect those funds, then that means the municipality may have to borrow and increase costs on the other side of the coin. So again, trade-offs about who's carrying the burden is something we want to keep in mind with those.
Fair. And then Roger, you had a question. Are there local percentages, I assume you like targets for social housing in Courtenay? And you just mentioned that Canada overall is well below international targets. So are there local percentages goals for social housing? In the question, yeah, if everyone, are there local percentages for social housing in Courtenay? I think you mean targets or goals is my guess, is how I'm interpreting that question in the Q&A.
I'd have to refer to the housing news report, Nancy, because I don't have that number in front of me
That's
off
right.
the top of my head.
Fair, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up the slide where it was the total 20-year needs. So there's 8,300 or so for 20 years. And then I'm just seeing in there that there is oh, you know what? I have another stat actually. Sorry, I'm just realizing that slide's not helping me. It's another one. It's around
Actual
2,200 for in that kind of social category. Sorry, that's right. I realized I was consulting a wrong slide, but yeah. So that approximate number somewhere around in the quarter range.
Okay, great. We're coming to the end of our 90-minute session, so I just want to pause here. If there's any final questions that anyone has leaving, please do put up your hand. Now's a great time. But what I'm going to do just for the rest of the panel, I'll skip to sort of the next steps where we can discuss what's happening next. We might not have time to get to all this discussion for today. And we had our Q&A already. So in case people have to log off right now, just because thank you for your time today, reminder that you can keep in touch with us through Social Pinpoint. There's an opportunity there where you can sign up for email updates. So if you want to stay looped in on this project, sign up there because you're going to get email updates when there's other events or other things happening. So the QR code here will take you to our Social Pinpoint page. And then a reminder, a lot of the comments we've been received today did sort of start going into our next topic around growing and servicing complete communities. And this is where we're going to be speaking more to the types of amenities and the pressures that can come in terms of the growth. So we really do hope you can tune into July 28th, 29th as well. So we do know some of you might be dropping off. If there's any other questions in the queue there, Darby or Adam, Nancy, that you want to get to, I'll pass it back to you before we go. But I do want to just take a minute in case you're jumping off to remind you, please make sure you're signed up, and we really hope we see you at our next round of discussions. And if today's discussion, if you'd like to join in on Thursday, you're more than welcome, but please do spread the word amongst your networks. We'd love to see some more participation on Thursday's session. There's still time to register all the way up until Thursday at noon. Any final questions, Nancy, Adam, before you that you want to address or that have come up through the comments before we go?
I saw someone say, what about co-op housing? Having a lot of friends who've lived in co-op housing elsewhere, great model. If people want to build it in the city of Courtenay, actually a few years ago identified 4 properties that the city would be willing to entertain, engage in a partnership discussion on. So co-op, if there's an entity out there that wants to form, no efforts on the city's behalf to initiate that particular entity. But yes, absolutely, that form of housing would be supported in our community.
Great. Thanks for that comment, Nancy. And also just to reassure everyone, all your comments and your chats and your questions that have come out, if you haven't gotten to them, we will be following up, and we are taking them into consideration. There were some topics that maybe were a little bit outside of what we're discussing today, but those comments will still be summarized, shared back with the city, shared back to council through our engagement summary. So your efforts and your feedback are very much appreciated and very much taken into our summary and into our outputs from this engagement session. So with that, Adam, any final words from your side?
Just want to say, echoing what you just said there, Martha, thank you all. It's a lot of great discussion today, and I know there's a ton of questions that we weren't able to get to. We tried to touch on as many as we can, but we definitely will take your feedback and incorporate it as we continue on with our work and present to council. And just thank you all for your time, and hope to see you and stay engaged as we move through the rest of the process. Thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.